Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. This is a very small group for quite a formal presentation that I've prepared, so I might kind of lapse away from it a bit. But what I wanted to sort of start with was I just sat through I wasn't here yesterday, I don't know how many of you were, but I was here for the first session this morning. So it's a slight disadvantage coming in from outside and not having heard what everybody may have heard, but I was particularly taken by the presentation we just heard, and I'm very aware that this is a really complex and multifaceted issue, and what I've been asked to talk to you about is lessons from the philanthropic sector. So really I'm putting quite a narrow lens onto what is a very complex, multifaceted area. And I think it's pretty clear from the presentations we saw this morning that welfare reform is a key public policy issue for New Zealand and for most other countries in the world, and clearly the really big strategic issues have to be addressed by government. But I do think that welfare reform is a key issue for civil society and for all the players in civil society, including not-for-profit organisations, churches, communities and philanthropic funders. And there's really two things I wanted to talk to you about today. First is the size and scope of the philanthropic sector in New Zealand, and the second is the role of the philanthropic sector when we're considering this issue. So in 2006, the first comprehensive survey of philanthropic giving was undertaken in New Zealand. So Philanthropy New Zealand commissioned Burl to do a report which was titled Giving New Zealand. And what they estimated is that New Zealanders gave between $1.24 and $1.46 billion in 2005, 2006. If I could find a pen, I'd write that up, but I can't, so you'll have to remember it. And what the study did was it looked at three different sources: giving from trusts and foundations, giving by individuals and giving by businesses. So what they found, interestingly, was that businesses gave 7% of the total, 90 million. Gifts and bequests from individuals was 35% of the total, which is 443 million. And trusts and foundations provided 742 million, just under 58% of the total. And most of this comes from giving by what we call in New Zealand statutory trusts. So that's the community trust established from the sale of trustee savings banks, gaming trusts, energy trusts and lottery grants board. So why those seem quite big numbers, we have to realise that in 2007, MSD had an annual vote of 13 billion. So if you take the $742 million, that is the total pot of philanthropy, MSD basically spends that every 3 weeks. So, from where I stand, I see the philanthropic dollar as a really precious resource and one that we have to use really carefully in this issue. I think that the role of philanthropy in New Zealand and in the not-for-profit sector is to think about it as providing the venture capital of social change. So what I want to talk to you about is some of the initiatives that philanthropy has supported that are a kind of a segue into this issue. So philanthropy has a unique role in society, largely because philanthropic givers are actually unconstrained by either government and the ballot box or by the shareholder expectations that often constrain corporate giving. And so philanthropy can put up risk capital for innovative social projects that you might not see coming from the government. And many of you may not be aware, but a lot of the institutions that we hold quite dear in New Zealand were first funded by philanthropy. And my favourite example is the Women's Refuge Movement, which was first funded by Sir Roy Mackenzie, who some of you may remember. He passed away about 2 years ago, an extraordinary New Zealander. And I had the privilege of working for Sir Roy for 10 years, and he told me about in the late 60s when this group of women came to talk to him about what was called domestic violence. And in those days, domestic violence was regarded by the police as a private affair, and if a woman called the police, they wouldn't necessarily come because it was regarded as a private matter between a man and his wife. And these women came to talk to Sir Roy Mackenzie in his office on the terrace, and they asked him for $1,500 to start a women's refuge. And he looked at them and he said, "You don't need 1,500, you need 15,000. And then he pulled his chequebook out of his jacket pocket, wrote them out a cheque and sent them out the door with that. So that's what I mean by philanthropy being able to sort of take that risky, when no one else would fund it, no one would listen to those women. And there's lots and lots of examples in New Zealand. He also helped set up the hospice movement in New Zealand, and the Tyndall Foundation, who you'll all be aware of, the Tyndall family who set up the warehouse, have funded a number of examples of social innovation that I'm going to talk about.